Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection, and
Yes,
there's
we
the
do.
evidence.
You should feel very protected
This
right
week, Jay Hall joins us to talk about the dating game. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is Carbona Grande Resorts and Spas, the investment opportunity of the new climate world order. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be J.L. Hall, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the Webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding the satirical content. Our regular notices. The opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear. This webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now, our special guest today, J.L. Hall. Greetings, Jay. Let's give it up for Jay Hall. Yes, we're giving it up for him. We now have fake applause instead of the old fake applause where I held up my fingers and did that. So, greetings.
Genuine fake applause is superior to the old fake applause.
You have to get the authentic fake applause. Yes.
So, Jay, it's good to have you, and we do sometimes tell people that they will know they have been had.
I think he already knows that.
So now we're talking about dating the cosmos. We have, as
we're not. It's not like courting. It's not like courting the It's like no.
Well, I went to date the cosmos, but I couldn't find a restaurant big enough to go.
Let's make this distinction clear. Okay.
Yes. We're talking about how old are you, and it's something that we sort of enjoy. How do I phrase this? As humans, rendering opinions that are merely that, opinions.
I tried enjoying it as a Martian.
Sets of evidence, which is the existence of the cosmos, and you'll have the evolutionary side, who conjectures one idea. And then you have the young creation side that renders another idea of the when. Then you have groups in between, progressive creationists, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, all of them, I would suggest, have issues that they have to answer for to make their system work, whatever it is. Young Earth Creation has to deal with the question of starlight and time, for example. I think there's answers to that, but yes, we have to have answers to those kinds of questions. I also think progressive creationists, for example, have to deal from a Christian standpoint with the question of Adam and Eve and sin. And some, we have William Lane Craig, for example, opting for mytho-history. Yes, God does have an Adam, but Adam came out of an evolutionary being. Maybe, like Stott, a Neanderthal farmer that he elected to be the Adam of the universe. And then Adam sinned, and sin spread not only through his progeny, but across to his neighbors and friends and so forth. I don't find any compelling reason to believe other than it makes the idea of creation more acceptable, maybe, to evolutionists.
It's more acceptable if it's not actually creation.
Yeah, it's more acceptable.
If it wasn't actually like created,
Right.
that makes creation a lot more acceptable.
Right.
Yeah,
So, and I'm not saying that
just kind of
the
happened.
cosmos is not ancient. I don't know. I'm saying I don't know. I wasn't at the event. I have no way to measure backwards to the event, really. Everything we have developed scientifically to attempt to do that, I would suggest is virtually untestable. You can go so far with it because you can test from here to there by various means and then say, okay, now this new invention I have for measuring distance works based on other things that I can validate it with.
So if you're saying so when you so it sounds like what you're saying is if you try to follow the science on this, you're going to follow it straight into the mist of speculation. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's
That's
exactly what, and we have an example
it's
of
like there's
that,
this
which
big
I'm going to raise
fog.
right away because this is so new. It was revelatory even to scientists that deal with the age of the cosmos that the cosmos is actually not 13.8 billion years old, but
Who
is
knew?
27 billion years old. Now, I'm going to ask Jay to explain why that has to be the case.
Well, the Webb telescope has brought about a lot of neat discoveries, and you'll see stories about star formation, but that of course is a lot of it is a lot of speculation. So because we see distant spiral galaxies, say, and we know that those take some time to develop, even based on evolutionary models, since they're so far away, and based on assuming the Big Bang, of course, putting all these assumptions together, you have to extrapolate it. And so if even at the very beginning of the universe, you have these things that are already, to make a human analogy, while they look like they're over 100 years old, well, then you have to backstep and say, okay, well, let's just stretch the age of the universe, which of course solves some problems, but creates others.
Okay. So they're doing it to make enough time, to create enough time for the universe to evolve into the state that we currently see it.
Right. So that's unexpected. And then if you look at the idea of, because you have some galaxies that are kind of oval and some that are kind of like a big ball, you have these different shapes. But the ones that look really neat are the ones that are spiral, and even based on fairly straightforward assumptions, and a matter of millions of years, it gets all swirled together and it's just one big blob. So when you take your coffee and you stir in the cream, eventually you see it kind of makes a little bit of a swirl, almost like a spiral galaxy. But eventually all the cream and the coffee gets mixed up. It doesn't take very long. So even based on their own assumptions, the spiral galaxies can only be so many millions of years old, but that contradicts what they need to date it at, which would be on the order of like billions.
Well, I just want everybody to know that I have found the dark matter, and it is in my backyard. It's I was I was digging up the dirt, and wait a minute, here it is. It's like we're trying to figure out what's holding the galaxies together. It's right here in my backyard. We're still looking for that, though, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm a skeptic on terms of the dark matter. They say, oh, we have the absolute proof and here's the evidence. But if you look at some other scientists, mainstream, they're willing to criticize it. And so it is kind of a fix because you have galaxies, you have galaxy clusters, you have strings of galaxy clusters. And so in the well-known book, The Big Bang Never happened by Eric Lerner, that's one of his main arguments against the Big Bang, is that you have a whole structure to the universe, which is almost like, whoa, it's almost like an intelligent designer put it together. And it's really pretty amazing. And then as we learn more, that structure gets more complicated, like a web of a web.
Yeah.
And then even in our own solar system, even though it's often discounted if you take just the basic astronomy class, well, they used to talk about Bode's law. Well, if you count the asteroid belt, which might be an exploded planet, and except for Neptune, which is just slightly off, almost all the other planets are almost dead on if you apply Bode's law. And that's, again, well, that's almost like an architect put the solar system together. So there's a lot of things that are overlooked.
Isn't there like don't you have to get like a writ of habeas corpuscle or something before you can say you found the particles of of dark matter. We have to have it, you know.
Well, I know I think they use X-ray satellites, and there's some implications.
Oh,
So
really?
it's maybe gravitational effects, and they infer that, that must have been due to dark matter when it couldn't have been due to other causes. So it's not directly effective. And then some would say that dark matter, even though it is dark, based on certain assumptions, would have to be maybe so dense or whatever, would have to emit light, but yet they don't find that. So there's all kinds of weird assumptions. It's just a fix to the old universe model from my perspective.
It's kind of like the law of retrograde motion of the planets. You know, they're kind of like, they kind of loop through space. That was the explanation until they figured out, no, let's just put the sun in the middle and then it all works.
Bingo.
So we need some kind of Copernican thing to happen, or maybe maybe young Earth creationism is the Copernican revolution.
I think there's a lot of people on it, and you have some creationists like the one that came up with the buckyballs, the carbon that forms these neat shapes, which are related to, carbon fiber that's used so commonly today. I don't know his full creation belief, but definitely leans that direction, because some creationists may just hold to a young earth where others would hold to a young earth and a young universe. But the point is, every once in a while, like Raymond Damadian, you have a more high profile creationist who is willing to agree that not only the Bible, but the science actually backs up the young earth, young universe idea.
Okay, so I want to be careful, because sometimes I can unnecessarily offend someone who holds a different view than I hold. Progressive creationists, some of them are very intelligent and are trying to maintain biblical integrity with their view and to explain how things happen. I think Hugh Ross tries to do that, for example. I don't agree with his views, but I think he's sincere and he's trying to answer science questions and biblical questions at the same time. I also have trouble with some young earthers, not because they don't tend to that view, but because of the way that they may say, for example, well, you can only really understand God's creation if you read the King James Bible. I think that's a problem, right? So we have to deal at some point with actually answering the questions from a scientific standpoint. So let's start with you. You are interested in this, and your position is young earth, right?
Yes. And I'm kind of a both and in terms of apologetic methodology. So I do have a great respect for, say, those that would go along with Van Til, but I also have a lot of evidential aspects, and like Sean McDowell and people along those lines, I definitely have respect for. So what I'm saying is, you have some verses that seem to be fairly clear. Jesus saying at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, quoting from Genesis. And then, of course, you have Exodus 20:11, for in 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested on the seventh day. So if you take those verses just by themselves, what Jesus said, and then from the Ten Commandments, for me, a straightforward reading of that seems to have pretty clear implications.
Right. I would tend to agree with that. So, okay, well, that's good. So what is the science, do you think, that validates? I mean, there's a lot of things. I had an acquaintance. I forget exactly what his job was, but a soil engineer, maybe that's what he was, or something. But there's a lake that he has to periodically go and do some work with. He said the sedimentation happens in a particular way in this lake once a year. There's a particular sedimentation that accumulates. And according to the layers of that sedimentation, it has been there at least 50,000 years. Now, that's an interesting claim to make. How do we address those kinds of claims? And does a young Earth necessarily require it to be 6,000 to 10,000 years old?
Well, the multiple varves or multiple layers, you have something like that in the Mount St. Helens deposit. And often it could be the different grain sizes will filter out just naturally in terms of forming layers. And there are some lakes, I think, in Europe where occasionally they'll have maybe something like landslides, and kind of like turbidites are like that, but not quite a turbidite, but or turbidity current deposit rather. But that once you have the shaking in say an area where there's a big lake and there's lake deposits at the bottom, that might form another layer if you have things like that, and also just storms that bring in more deposits. And then some things that we know about, like we look at a certain date and then another date, and then we see that there were more than just annual layers. But I would say when you have, say, fish in the Green River Formation that are almost perfect, they're really finely, you see the details, the fins and the scales and whatnot. So the fact that the fish is vertical like this, and it's kind of like the polystrate trees that go through multiple layers, you know that would have had to have formed, because otherwise the fish would have rotted or the tree would have rotted. So you have things along those lines, another way to date it. So multiple layers can happen in a lot of various ways other than just saying they were annual.
Okay. What about ice cores? Does that tell us anything about the age of the Earth?
Well, you can, going back to Mount St. Helens again, there's, I think, hundreds of feet of ice on top of that, but we know that it, blew up in around 1980, and some subsequent years there were some after effects. And then you can go to Greenland. There was some World War II planes. I think they give it a nickname, Glacier Girl, and there's hundreds of feet of ice on top of that, and they went through a big excavation to dig that out. But the key thing is more recent times you can actually count the layers, but once you go deeper and deeper and deeper, these layers actually get crushed together, and then they kind of obliterate. And so what they use is things like oxygen measurements and some other things. And then they have to correlate from one place to another. And then the correlation is kind of tricky, just like the tree rings, things along those lines. So once you go past a certain point, it's all based on certain kinds of assumptions. So the idea is after the global flood, you have the waters very, very hot due to extreme volcanisms. There's seamounts, ocean volcanoes everywhere. So the water got very warm, much evaporation, and then in the northern climes, the snow just accumulated, and so you have this ice age, which maybe lasted hundreds of years, and so because you had some superstorms, after effects of the flood, catastrophism kind of just decreased kind of slightly after the flood, and so you have that the conditions of the flood are really the only thing that actually explains the ice age. The secular scientists have to come up with weird aspects of, well, we were farther away from the sun or this kind of thing, whereas the flood kind of naturally explains an ice age after the flood is just a matter of fact.
How is that? Help me understand, because I'm a layman on this flood ice age question. How does one necessarily correlate with the other?
Primarily to the extreme heating of the oceans would have caused a tremendous amount more precipitation, and in the north and the south, you would have that the snow would have accumulated more, and the fact that the storms would have been more intense, kind of due to the after effects of the flood. So again, it's based on simulations and computer models, but it's a reasonable explanation. And the idea of where all this extra rain and snow came from is harder to explain if you don't have this tremendous heating of the oceans.
Yeah. Well, another aspect of the rain, the noetic flood in the rain, it has been pointed out, and it seems, I don't know, it seems many miss this aspect of it, that prior to the flood, it never rained. It tells us in Genesis that a mist came up from the face of the earth and watered the whole earth. So that it's surmised then that when the great deeps opened, quote unquote, going back to Genesis, there was a fissure that actually goes around the entire planet, kind of like a seam on a baseball. and all of the water would have shot out about from under the first layer there, maybe 20 miles into the air. So it didn't have to rain. It came from the Earth itself, shot up, and then came back down. The face of the planet, the landmass has shifted as a result of that, which created what we now have as our mountains and valleys and those sorts of things. In addition to which, the tallest mountains on the planet are actually under the ocean, which is kind of interesting. So, is there any reason then to believe there wasn't a worldwide flood, other than it's not convenient for, say, evolutionists?
Well, they have hints that over time it's gotten more towards this viewpoint, and so the catastrophic viewpoint has increased over time. And there was even a Nova episode, Mega Flood, about the Great Missoula Flood in the Northwest and Washington and Oregon, and the channeled scablands were the result of a great flood. So you have these things that are generally accepted. And Derek Ager, he wrote a book, The New Catastrophism. And so his thesis, which actually came out in a book in '73, The Nature of the Stratigraphic Record. So basically, each of the layers are formed catastrophically, but then you ask the question, where did these millions of years come from? And in the Grand Canyon, there's places where you have millions of years gaps, but yet they look like a stack of pancakes that one happened after the other, and some of them are like a knife edge contact. And you can go there and see that yourself when you visit the Grand Canyon. So if each layer happened rapidly, which is well accepted, and instead of using the word catastrophism, the term now is episodic. So there's even a journal with that name. So catastrophism often leads to you mean like Noah's flood? So they even changed the word, like so many things, changed the words, and then we're thinking in a different way. So when you put all that together, each layer happened rapidly, and then we don't really see evidence of the time gaps between the layers. You obviously have to come up with most of the rocks were deposited all at one time. Well, Noah's flood.
So what should we call that? I mean, we have the word politically correct. Should we say this is like a worldview correct word, episodic?
Yes, it's changing the language to favor their worldview. Exactly.
Yeah. But at the same time, they're getting closer to ours in a way, or they're saying they're making statements that are compatible with ours in some case.
Yes. Yeah, even if you go before catastrophism kind of gained in popularity, of course, the big thing was that a giant rock, hit in Mexico and caused the dinosaurs to leave us. So that around 1980, that view became more widely accepted, and so that is a definite view of catastrophism. So the waters would have gone very, very far inland, and if you have some giant impact from space, you're basically going to get a continental wide flood, if not a global flood. So, and that's become more and more acceptable with looking at the different impact craters in the geologic record, while you obviously have a catastrophe. So that's become way more accepted.
I just remembered something that you were talking about catastrophism, and you have the issue of coalification. I saw something maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago now. I don't even recall exactly what it is, but some scientists were working on a question of coalification and discovered that under the right conditions, they can wood, which is really largely what coal comes from, can become coal in a much shorter time than had originally been thought.
Yes. Now I don't know if you could do this safely if you or your wife does the pottery with the kiln, because I'm not sure what temperatures you exactly need. But basically, take a pipe you could probably get from the plumbing supply, and cap off both ends, and put a piece of wood in there. And I'm trying to think of exactly what you need to add. You do need to add something, but something that would naturally form from the plants, and what would, of course, represent what you'd find under the flood conditions. But basically, you just have to heat it so long, and the coloration process will begin. Of course, if it's inside a tube like that, a piece of pipe, and it's capped off on both ends at high heat, which of course, under the pressure of the various layers during the flood, you would have all of that together, the heat and the pressure. It does begin to colorify, and that's the video, the well-known video is called the Young Age of the Earth. And that's they do that experiment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I thought it was very cool. I went, I never knew that. So what about the dinosaurs? We're kind of going around a lot of different sorts of questions, but I think they come back to the same thing: is does the Bible best explain the events that we have seen happen on our planet, certainly, and perhaps in the universe, but on our planet, certainly? Or are there other better, more viable explanations? So, I just, someone the other day said, well, how did Noah, for example, get all of the animals on the ark? He had to take 2 of everything, and there's at least, I don't know, this many species of dogs. How would he get all of those on there?
Use one of those pods moving services. To me, it's just so obvious. You just send the guys out, they put them in a pod. Yeah. No?
So it talks about that the Lord brought the animals to Noah, and you have to keep in mind that the Genesis kind. That's my latest book, Biological Essentialism. The term that I like to use is essential types of life. And in academia, the idea of biological essentialism is kind of the term. And so I use that. It's essentially Aristotle's biology, but it relates to the Genesis kinds. So in the academic world, often natural kinds is used, and of course species. But where does species come from? If you go to the Gutenberg Bible, the Latin, it uses species for kind. And the traditional creationist term is beramen, meaning created kind. So you basically have a wolf type animal going onto the ark, and even the poodles and the chihuahuas, everything ultimately came from that. So do we believe in evolution? Yeah, apparently there's a facilitated variation after the flood. And of course, we don't know, like the radiation or whatever maybe cause more mutations. And that's how we get the poodle. Ken Ham likes to pick on the poodle. And
poodle.
have all these variations. But in terms of the dinosaurs, either infants or adolescents, smaller ones. And you have to keep in mind that we're talking about land, air-breathing animals. So a lot of critters that people think, oh, that was on the ark. Well, it's limited to land, air-breathing creatures were the ones that were on there. And various estimates, thousands, of creatures were on the ark. And I have the Ark Encounter. Where do I have it? I have it right there, the Ark Encounter. Yeah, I got to hear Ken Ham about a year ago. I brought my class at the time. I'm not currently teaching, but he spoke here in Oklahoma City. And I have not been to the Ark Encounter. That's on my bucket list. So, they have the cages there and how they would have done it based on ancient technology. So the classic book is Noah's Ark, a feasibility study or something like that. And that kind of gets into all these questions. But in terms of the kinds, far, far less than species. And so the Endangered Species Act, I think, was the same year as Roe v. Wade. So for me, the idea of the Genesis kinds relates to that. What is an endangered species?
Right. So that's a good question. What is an endangered species? And speciation, quote unquote, as you pointed out, we're actually do that now. We cause that to happen. We have breeders that come up with new kinds of dogs, as an example, by interbreeding and that sort of thing. So,
see, this is what gets me, is that, one of the first things that a lot of proponents of evolution run to is speciation. They'll say this is evidence of evolution, but they've obviously all missed that one Star Trek episode where Mr. Spock explained to this. Do you remember the old Star Trek where they had this one humanoid race that was half black and half white?
That rings a bell.
Yeah. Well, Frank Frank Gorshin played one of the characters, and he says to Captain Kirk, he says, "Do I understand that your people believe you descended from apes?" You know, he puts it like that. And Spock says, quite perceptively here, perspicaciously, he says, um, the actual theory is that lower species evolved into higher species. Okay, so it's like that's it. That's the germ. That's the gist of it. You know, we can have new species. The question is, now I know that they've since disputed. Can we even talk about one species being higher than another? So let's just say more complex, more intelligent, more adapting, more adaptable. Do lower species evolve into what we used to call higher species? Have we seen that? Have we seen um, have we seen any species be able to do things really that represent a leap forward in their development?
No, what you have is you have different hybrids and mixing and that sort of thing, like the citrus, the grapefruit, the pomelo, and I think the citron and the mandarin orange.
Yeah, more
Basically,
power.
you can make a giant triangle of all the different types of hybrids between them, but they all fit into the citrus category.
More pungent or powerful forms of hemp to create
There
multiple
you go.
marijuana.
Yes, I'm in Oklahoma. Yes, that's right.
So, you know, one of our sponsors is kind of excited about the lengthening of the age of the cosmos
Right.
because it gives them more time to make money now.
Yeah, you could think of this as kind of like evolution, right?
Yeah, it kind of is like that.
Yeah, when you see images like this, what do you think of? Vacation fun, relaxation, time away with the family? Well, here are two words you should be thinking: cha-ching. Because any day now, maybe any minute now, if you listen to some people, the Arctic beaches of North America, Greenland, Northern Europe, and Asia will all look like this, making them the investment opportunity of a lifetime. Work will soon be starting on our new chain of Carbona Grande resorts and spas. Contact Oxcore Industries today for a free investment prospectus at 1-800-CLIMATE. So when the rest of the world looks like this, yours can look like this. Carbona Grande Resorts and Spas, the investment opportunity of the new climate world order. This is your chance to make big money. You know,
Big
my
money.
house is, according to Al Gore, my house should have been underwater about 5 years ago. I mean, literally. I mean, we were underwater financially, but mortgages were underwater. We had empty houses, but I was very disappointed that there was no beachfront property within a block of my house. So now you can actually get it in Canada if you look.
So, as we are kind of turning the corner in our time here, if you were to talk to somebody who is unclear about a young earth position or how it may be in, what's the word I want to use, understandable to somebody who believes more in the Big Bang Theory, where would you start and how would you talk to them about that from a scientific standpoint?
Well, it's not real well known, but there's creation documents as well as mainstream where the entire universe is rotating, which would nix the Big Bang right from the get-go. And the Big Bang Theory has had to gone through so many fixes, the inflation theory and different things like this, that you want to point to, say, like quasars. Well, quasars are extremely bright, and the redshifts are kind of off the scale. So that would put them very, very distant. But yet you have some nearer galaxies, and they're basically connected up with the quasars. So that almost even questions our general interpretation of the redshift idea. And just because something grows, whether it's your bank account, your waistline, or the population of Houston, you can't always extrapolate it backwards. You know, that's like the idea of how to lie with statistics. You can't just take a certain trend and extrapolate it back forever. So what it is, it's a naturalistic way to explain the universe, to get rid of the idea that God made it. But yet there are these design features, like if you saw the privileged planet, exactly where we are in the galaxy, and the fact of a total solar eclipse, the apparent size of the moon and the sun exactly match up. What are the odds? So there are many things like this that point to on the personal idea of like that God made our beautiful body, and we have a heart and lungs and a brain that can think, and all this sort of stuff. And like the Paley argument of we see a watch on a beach, obviously it was made, despite what Richard Dawkins might say. So when I look at the universe and the fact that it has structure upon structure, so even the non-Christian scientists have been able to say, hold it, this doesn't quite fit with the Big Bang. So there's Halton-Arp and researchers like that point to plasma and things like this. So what have the creationists done? Well, Humphreys predicted almost with a number that was very close for the magnetic fields of the planets before they were actually measured. So creationists not only come up with some interesting ideas, they also make predictions that come true.
Now, Humphreys, was he also one who had a theory about the speed of light?
Yeah, so he's using Einstein's relativity, and instead of a black hole sucking everything in, he has what's called a white hole cosmology, and you go backwards. So there's rapid expansion of the entire universe, and that helps to explain the distant starlight. I have a great respect for that, and John Hartnett, an astronomer, he has a variation on that, but he is basically using the same idea. And then Jason Lyle goes with an interesting idea. Light travels infinite in one direction, and then half the speed of light another direction. So on average, back and forth, it goes the speed of light. So that's another way to explain the distant starlight problem.
So is this, is this a view you subscribe to in terms of explaining how, like, for instance, we're looking at a galaxy that's a million light years away, Andromeda, and there's a supernova that we observe in, as it's we're observing the light from the supernova. And they're saying, well, this obviously happened a million years ago.
Right. So what I would say is that, Job, you have Eliphaz saying even the stars are not pure in your sight. So the fall affected all, and you have Romans 8 and the groaning of the creation. So whenever it happened, you have to fit it within the way I'm looking at it, this roughly 6,000 year time frame. And the bad stuff that happens, there's exploding stars, supernovas, and such, that we have to fit these different events. And I would say that the stuff that, obviously the moon's been hit a few times, had a few punches. So that these things that we would consider bad happened after the fall, because at the end of creation, we have the phrase very good.
Right. Well, I'm not so much concerned about that. I mean, that is an important point, but using it as an indicator of the measurement of the age of the universe, and we're actually seeing an event that happened a million light years away. How long did it take the light from that event to reach us, and how do we know?
Well, that's where I don't think I have an excellent answer. I just put a ballpark that you have an acceleration possibly during the first 4 days of creation, and then this rapid expansion of the whole universe. So that's where the big changes occur. But I would just say less than 6,000 years. But I don't have a theory on any being more specific than that. There may be some creationists that do, but I just haven't thought it through to that extent. That's an excellent question.
What about time frame dilation? The idea that time during the days of creation could have been moving more slowly in the vicinity of the Earth. Have you seen the movie Interstellar?
Yes, that's pretty wild. Yeah, I'm just going along with the idea that the key thing was on day 4, things changed, and that that's when the stars were actually created on day 4, and that's kind of my general assumption.
Okay.
Okay. Now, for those who are viewing and go, okay, what is your background as you are dealing with these things? Are you just sort of a layman, armchair kind of a guy like me? You read books, you go, okay, that makes sense. I think I'll buy that view. Or is there something more to J. Hall that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, you can go to totalyouth.us to see my 3 most recent books. And the latest one has to do with the biological aspect, basically the Genesis kind, but explained and trying to relate to how mainstream, mostly philosophers of biology, would relate to it. And then my 2 prior books before that are Is a Young Earth Possible? And Yes, Young Earth Science. And I started out as a geology major. I was spent a good amount of time with John Morris, the Ark explorer. We went to the same church in Norman where I went to school. And so I took a good number of geology classes. And then this was in the early 1980s, and the oil field had kind of a drop in that time. And so I thought, well, what else can I do? And I've always enjoyed math, so I switched to math. So I have a bachelor's in math and a master's in math. And I was a professor at Howard College in West Texas for 11 years. And so I have 53 credit hours in various scientific fields, like 1 oceanography class, ecology, this, that, and the other, physics and chemistry and so forth. So I have a broad, basic understanding of science. And I've been a published creationist since the late 1980s. 1 article in the Creation Research Society Quarterly on Hutton and his biology. He basically believed in a steady state. So a steady state for the Earth, but also, which contradicts evolution, and that's why it's hardly ever mentioned, a steady state for life. So cows were always cows, bats were always bats, and humans were always humans. So Hutton's biology actually contradicts Darwin, which is seldom ever mentioned.
Right, right. Now, here's something that I have tried to explain to others as we've talked about these issues, is we have really a limited amount of actual scientific data for our claims. After we go past that, we enter the world of really philosophy and faith. We have a philosophy that certain things are true, and a faith that persuades us that they are true, but not any actual evidence that they're true. Is that a fair assumption? A fair explanation?
Well, the scripture, I believe, is true and historically accurate. So there's that Del Tackett did, Genesis is History. I think that's excellent. But you have other historical accounts. You have the Epic of Gilgamesh, and you have numerous flood traditions from all over the world. So you do have aspects. For example, the Hawaiians have their king list memorized, however many kings. But that only goes so far back. So you have the famous Sumerian king list. And if you and I'm not the only one who's thought this, if you retranslate it from our system is base 10, but their system was base 60, like your watch. You have 60 seconds to the minute and 60 minutes to the hour. That comes from the Babylonians. Well, if you translate from one to the other, you almost get a time scale that actually fits nicely with the Genesis record. So there are historical aspects, the Mayan, Aztec, and those groups, and some of the Mexican native peoples, if you take their chronology, and that's even acknowledged by the secular scientists and researchers, archaeologists, that you basically come with, oh, well, according to their story, the Earth is just thousands of years old. So you have a few traditions and historical accounts that actually fit with what the Bible says.
So that might indicate a common ancestor back there 6,000 years ago, from which the other stories evolved and morphed down through the centuries.
Yes, yes. And of course, there's that well-known book, what is it, Richardson, Eternity in Their Hearts. It kind of follows a similar argument.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So Starlight in Time, you think you have a pretty credible answer for that. Sometimes, and Joy and I, we've written on some of these aspects in the past and have equated it to something like this, because when I bring up the issue of we really have the same set of evidence from which to draw conclusions, I get pushback, especially from evolutionists. They go, no, we don't have the same sets of evidence. And I look around, I go, well, there's only one cosmos that I know of. Is there some other cosmos that you're looking at? No, we have the same sets of evidence. I said, but it seems to me that what we have is like a murder scene. You walk into a house, there's a body laying in the middle of the living room with a little round hole in the center of its eye. And we're trying to figure out what happened here. That's the question. We're looking at it after the fact. It wasn't observable when it occurred. So now we have to put this back to kind of Columbo, do a Columbo thing here, right? So what happened? And to me, it's straightforward. Someone shot the guy in the head. Pretty straightforward. All the evidence seems to be like that. No, I don't have a gun, but we have the indications that a gun was used. Evolutionists, it seems, look at that and go, no, it wasn't a murder. It was an accident. He fell down a flight of stairs and broke his neck, except that it's a one-story house with no stairs and his neck isn't broken. Am I missing something? Or is that kind of what we're seeing happen?
Yeah, I think so. It's often not seeing, don't confuse me with the facts almost. And speaking of Columbo, one of my favorite episodes is the body is under the fish pond on the floor of the disco. And I thought he figures out the volume, and you're only allowed so many fish per cubic yard of the water. And then the middle one the math don't work. So they do the ground penetrating radar, find the dead body under the fish pond, and then they project it onto the big screen, because one of those disco places have these big screens with the wild videos. So that's about one of my favorites. But to give an example, let's stick close, the moon. So Herschel, who discovered Uranus, he saw apparently lights or fire on the moon, and it's often explained away, well, his telescope wasn't good enough. And he actually showed it to his sister. She saw it. So many years later, another astronomer saw it, and I think 4 others saw it. And then there was an astronomer, the one who suggested Mount Wilson. He supposedly saw some variations in coloring on the moon, not necessarily lights, but all those I think could be related to volcanic activity or earthquakes. But the moon's supposed to be just this dead solid rock, nothing going on. So that would fit in with a young moon, but not the old moon. And so you see some things like that. Well, how about follow up on it? And again, when we've been on the moon, the dating has been all over the place. The very, very old, not quite so old. And so you have Darwin's eldest son, George. He talked about how the moon maybe came from the Earth. But now that we've sent 12 people to the moon, we've analyzed that the moon's composition is way, way different than Earth. So that doesn't work. But the moon is getting farther and farther away. So you call that the recession. And that's a very, very solid argument. When creationists do the calculations, so when it was touching, which really wouldn't work, you have to go back like 1.4 billion years. So obviously the moon isn't that old. But when some of the evolutionists do the calculation, they're even fixing that and some helpful assumptions on their side, they still say that the Earth and the moon would have touched like maybe 2 billion years ago, which still doesn't fit, the older theory.
Right. So they have to keep adjusting their time frames to make things work, rather than saying, I don't know what.
Yeah. Last I heard, they were still assuming that the moon was once part of the Earth, though. A Mars-sized object hits the Earth and pushes out.
Yeah, but that its origin was not directly from the Earth, because George Darwin's idea was that it actually was one object, and then somehow it's split apart. That it was actually part of the Earth. Whereas what you said is correct. That's the most common view of where the moon came from. You're correct.
Yeah. So was it something about the rotation of the Earth? He thought it spun apart or something, the earlier view?
I think you'd still have to include some kind of impactor to make that part of the Earth to split off. I don't know his theory that well, but in terms that we can measure right now that the moon is getting farther and farther away, and they call that tidal friction. So even though the water is very smooth, there's still a certain amount of friction. And because the energy has to equal out, it's kind of a physics thing. that somehow you have to give way and there's loss of energy. So how it works out is that the moon just gets farther away.
I heard it was like
and we can measure that.
A couple inches a year is what I heard.
Something along those lines, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I have been led to understand that when they designed the first lunar landing, they created very large feet on the vessel because
Yeah.
they believed there would be like several feet
Right.
of dust that they would sink into.
Yep.
What did they find when they went there?
Well, there is some, but not as much as they thought. And so the generally most creationists have said in terms of that kind of a traditional creationist argument that it's better not to go there because the evidence is at best ambiguous. Of course, there's other aspects of the moon, like I mentioned, the fact that it's moving away, you just track backwards.
Well, we'd landed probes, before Apollo, and they sent back transmissions, so they didn't sink into the quicksand of the moon. Was that, in fact, one of the Apollo missions brought back parts of, I think they were the Mariner, or I forget what the name of the probes were. But yeah, they kind of had some evidence that they weren't going to just, be swallowed up by lunar quicksand.
Right.
So Don has.
And in terms of the particles in the solar system, there's things that push the dust away and other things that are going to draw the small particles to the sun. So even from some creationists that have looked at that, use that as saying, well, even our solar system seems to be younger than a lot of evolutionary assumptions, because kind of like a solar vacuum cleaner, so to speak, that our solar system would have a lot fewer particles if it were really as old as assumed.
So what do you think have been some of the most surprising discoveries in recent years that have, in your mind, been made current cosmology more compatible with creationism, even though they may not be admitting it?
Well, I still think the idea of the magnetic fields of the planets and the Earth itself, that is still quite potent. And I have some older textbooks that deal with the geology or the study of the planets and comparing it to the Earth. And we know a lot about the Earth's magnetic field, and even that they can't quite explain. They have this dynamo aspect, but yet it has a lot of issues. And in terms of its decay, a lot of times when we have some new satellites measuring the Earth's total field strength, it's decaying even faster than what they thought. And then the fact that the creationist Humphreys actually predicted the fields of the planets, and then we've noticed those, and that seems to be consistent with the idea that God created the planets with a magnetic field, and then they've decayed.
Aren't there some planets that don't have one at the present time?
There may be, but the fact that it was so consistent with his model, I thought that was pretty amazing. And but in terms of Earth's magnetic decay, if it did get to a point that it accelerated, it would that weak points in our magnetic field, there would be solar radiation that would affect our electronics. And there's kind of doomsday scenarios in some of the science fiction movies. So I don't think we'll quite get to that point, because Jesus said even the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. So in terms of climate change or some of these other ones, the world won't get flooded again, and there won't be a catastrophe so big that wipes out all of humanity.
Yeah, because if we lost our magnetic field, our days are numbered, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, the radiation would kill people, and then depending on the level of the break in the magnetic field, you'd have communication problems and trouble with electronics.
Yeah.
And what would happen to my magnetic personality?
Well,
that would stay intact.
It might be able to replace the Earth's magnetic field, Don. They might have to send you to the magnetic North Pole and just stand there.
And just stay there. Just stand there.
Then you'd be like protecting the Earth, But
I do have a better answer. It's if you're not familiar with Nathan Jensen with Answers in Genesis and his book Traced. Again, any kind of a dating thing is based on assumption, but this one is well grounded. It's based on our human mutation rate, and he also backs it up with historical records. And so basically all the human family is interconnected. Noah and his sons, that's where, at least in the most recent break, we all come from. And so the human family is more interconnected than we think, and it basically contradicts the standard view that all these things took a long time, a long time to figure out farming and long time for this. Whereas you can take some in Japan, you just kind of trace across, the land, and you'll eventually wind up in a part of California. And there's actually a tribal group, like they're stitching on their work, and their pottery is almost exactly the same as this group in Japan, and even the genetics match up. So you have examples like that it doesn't take all that long to figure out. Thor Heyerdahl went from Morocco, I think, to the Caribbean, and then he also went from Ecuador to a Polynesian island to prove that the ancients can do it in two different boats, a reed boat, and then another boat was balsa with a bamboo. So the ancients traveled the world a lot more quicker. But in terms of the time frame, Nathan Jensen has put dates to it, and it fits the young Earth view in terms of how humanity developed, and not the traditional view.
How many people remember Thor Heyerdahl today? I mean, he was really big on television when I was a kid. The Ra Expedition was his best-selling book. We'd see it in the, you go to the grocery store where they sold books and you'd see it. And people are pretty ignorant of all that today, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, it's sad. I think one of his books actually was titled, I don't think it was a traditional creationist, but the fact that he titled this, I think it might even be something like Following Adam's Path or In Search of Adam, something similar to that, but mentioning Adam.
That's sure to get canceled today.
It's interesting. I'm looking right now on the United States Geological Survey, which says from about 300 to 200 million years ago, late Paleozoic era, until very late Triassic, the continent we know now as North America was contiguous with Africa, South Africa, and Europe. They all existed as a single continent called Pangaea.
Yeah. It was right next to the continent of Pandemic, I think. And everybody there wore masks.
Right.
So
yeah. This wouldn't really be, quote, continental drift. This would be some cataclysmic event that brought this all to happen, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think you could have an impact from space. I'm all with that. You see the craters on the moon, and there are different craters on the Earth. Some are pretty large. And so that itself would cause a lot of, continental flooding. And that could have been a trigger to cause a lot of volcanism and to get the continental, the plates to start moving. Yeah. And again, as some creationists have pointed out, you have kind of where it speeds up the process. Once it gets going, it feeds on itself. And there's subtitles, you can see it, but there's a movie, Japan Sinks, and everything happens super fast. So you can have gas like methane can form a lubricant, and there's different aspects that once you have the gravity kind of sliding it down like a sled, it just keeps going faster and faster. So you have runaway subduction, and so it could actually happen quite fast.
There was a lot of catastrophism in early astronomy, a lot of speculation about like planets formed by banging into each other. I think Mars was allegedly created by some kind of catastrophe, and they were doing this to explain some of the orbital eccentricities of some of the planets, and they didn't even know about the rotational eccentricities of like Venus because it was totally shrouded. We didn't know then. It was mostly tidally locked, which we know. The only reason we know today is because we have radar or whatever they used to get through the clouds. But yeah, there was a lot of it, and now you don't hear about it so much. It's more, maybe there were some catastrophes in the very, very early, first few 100,000 years of the planet's formation, maybe million, but there's just no way to really talk about it, I don't think, in their views. I don't know, but I think John just froze up. Looks like he's about to sneeze. I don't know if he can hear us. He was having internet problems earlier. We're coming up on 2 o'clock. He was probably getting ready to close the show. So I'm going to wait until I'm going to turn my ringer, make sure it's off. Well, it's been great. Wait a minute, he's back. He's back.
I'm back.
Okay. I was about to do the closing without you.
Well, take us out of here.
Okay. All right. So let's give credit to whom credit is due. Well, don't we want to thank our guest for being here, though? I mean,
No. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit in LinkedIn, where we connected up, and I enjoy these discussions immensely.
Okay. Now I will give credit. Oh, you know what? Hold on a second. I got to check something here.
Sure. You get me all excited, and then you just pull it away again.
I just like to pull the rug out from under you. Okay, now I've checked it. Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur, special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys. Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yolik Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions. Both of them are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
Never. Nobody has even tried. Oops, there you go.
Yeah.
I can't touch anything on the
I was
screen.
just thinking, if the universe is 27 billion years old, how big of a cake would you have to make to get all the candles on it? That's kind of
one
weird.
for every star in the universe. So
really.
Actually, that's not even 1/3 of the stars in the
hit
galaxy.
The end button. All of y'all are watching. Adios.